of my life, my years on this planet, I've seen America go through basically 3 phases of widespread, heavily popularized, heavily promoted drug use that was all legal. I remember in the late 1950s, early 1960s, I think it was around the time my youngest brother was born, my mother was on Valium for a while. In fact, in 1965, the Rolling Stones did a song about this called Mother's Little Helper. It was so widespread. Housewives all across America were taking Valium. Then they learned that the benzodiazepine drugs, which Valium was the earliest one, can cause addiction and all kinds of weird problems. And so we got rid of that. And then, 10, 15, maybe 20 years ago, I don't recall how long ago it was, one of my old friends from high school, his name was Bill, was injured, got addicted to OxyContin, ended up overdosing, and he's dead now. We figured out, oh, well, that wasn't such a great idea, passing OxyContin out to everybody and other kinds of narcotics, and so we pulled back from that. And then back 7, 8 years ago, when my wife Louise had breast cancer and had surgery and chemo and went through, as a consequence of the drugs she was taking to suppress estrogen, was going through just a wild case of hot flashes. They put her on an SSRI drug, which are typically used as antidepressants, like Prozac kind of drugs. This was a super low dose. It was just intended to treat hot flashes. And she was on it for about a year, and when she went off, for weeks, she was getting electric shocks in her brain and just all kinds of wild symptoms. And I've been wondering ever since that happened, and that, like I said, that was years ago. When is the opiate, when is the Valium reckoning coming for SSRI drugs? Because it sure did not look like a good thing to me. Well, P.E. Moskowitz is on the line with us. P.E. is a writer of Mental Health, a newsletter about your broken brain, a lecturer who taught college classes, the author of 2 books with a third in process, and the co-founder of the media collaborative Study Hall. Moskowitz.xyz is their website, Moskowitz. And their Twitter handle is _PEM_PEM, PEM. P.E. Moskowitz, welcome to the program. You have been writing about this issue, and you're a contributor to The Nation magazine and others. And this piece, Breaking Off My Chemical Romance. Tell me what's going on here with SSRIs, these selective serotonin reuptake inhibitor drugs that are supposed to cure depression.
Yeah, so I've been interested in these drugs for a while because, like millions upon millions of Americans, I've struggled with mental health for a large part of my life and was kind of resistant to medication for a long time. And then, under the recommendation of a psychiatrist, one year just decided to try an SSRI or an SNRI, which is a similar class of drug. And she gave me basically no information about it. She was like, these are good drugs and there won't really be any side effects. The side effects are rare. Of course, that turned out to not be true. I, gained a bunch of weight on the drug. I had all these kinds of weird other side effects. And then trying to get off the drug, as you talked about with your wife, I had these horrible brain zaps. I, felt more depressed and anxious than ever. And it felt strange that no one had told me about any of this. And so I started looking more into it and realizing that, thousands of people online, every time I would tweet about something like this, dozens of people would be in my direct messages saying, this happened to me too, and no one is talking about it. So I wanted to start looking into the research and the kind of general consensus amongst scientists and psychiatrists about these drugs and seeing if the story is as rosy as we've made it out to be, which it turns out, obviously, it's not.
So are the symptoms that you had and that Louise had, and I'm telling this story with her permission, by the way, of these brain zaps. I mean, I've never experienced that, but she was describing it to me. I mean, I watched it happen. I mean, from the outside, and it seemed like she was getting like little miniature explosions inside her brain that were sometimes accompanied by sparks and colors and often by wild emotional swings. Is this the kind of thing that is normal for people who are trying to withdraw from these drugs, or is this are you guys outliers?
No, it's pretty normal. The prescription drug industry and the research they fund suggests that only a small percentage of people really experience SSRI withdrawal. But more independent research shows that up to 50% of people experience these longer term effects and have a really hard time getting off the drugs. And that just makes logical sense. For some reason, antidepressants were seen as somehow different than any other drug. And I'm not anti-drug, but we should think of drugs as drugs. And so, if you take a Valium every day, if you take even drinking coffee every day, you expect your brain to adapt to it. And so when you get off of it, you experience withdrawal effects, even if it's just drinking coffee. So why would these drugs be any different? And for so long, we've been taught that they somehow are different, that there wouldn't be withdrawal somehow. But now we're starting to discover that the withdrawals can be really horrible, and they are extremely, extremely common.
Now, I think it's really important to point out at this point that this category of drugs, or this class of drugs, can slightly flatten affect. There's an upside and downside of that. Affect being, the intensity of the emotions that you feel and that you express. The downside of it is, people like Dr. Peter Breggin, who are out there saying that, this huge number of school shooters were on these drugs. That, I think the jury is still out on that. It's speculative, but the upside is that for people who are struggling over the short term with, some horrible emotional crisis, their partner just died, or terrible things have happened in their lives, sometimes it's useful to soften our emotions for a little while and get through something, I suppose is the argument. But I've also seen numerous studies suggesting that, generally speaking, the results of these drugs in terms of dealing with psychological illnesses are, for many people, indistinguishable from those of placebos. Now, that said, clearly these drugs do help some people, and I'm not saying that they should be pulled off the market or anything like that. It seems to me like we should be looking at them the same way we look at Valium and OxyContin, which are still on the marketplace. What say you? You've done the much deeper dive on the research on this than I have.
Yeah, so back, about 20 years ago, Irving Kirsch, who directs the placebo studies program at Harvard, so he's not like a kook or like some kind of fringe scientist, he's at Harvard University, started looking into this and using Freedom of Information Act requests to get the unpublished studies about SSRIs and SNRIs, because the prescription drug industry usually only publishes the ones that show positive results. And what he found when you compare all those studies is that the difference between someone on an SSRI versus someone who's just taking a placebo is extremely negligible. And his research proved to be extremely controversial. There was all this kind of backlash to it. Obviously, the industry was very upset. But there was just recently, in the last month or so, a humongous study released. Tens upon tens of thousands of people were in this study. And it found that over a period of a few years, there was still no difference in the quality of life of people who had been taking antidepressants and who identified with having depression, and people who weren't taking antidepressants and who also identified with having depression. So I'm not suggesting that these drugs work for no one, but it seems like they've been oversold, in the same way that OxyContin and these other drugs have, as kind of a miracle cure for OxyContin was for physical pain. This is for mental pain. And they're kind of just doled out. If you go to a primary care doctor, they're just kind of doled out as soon as you say you're struggling with depression or anxiety or just grief because someone in your family died or whatever. And no one is really thinking about the long-term consequences of that or whether they will actually be helpful. 70% of prescriptions of antidepressants come from primary care doctors, not psychiatrists. So the vast majority of people are going in, getting one appointment, seeing a primary care doctor who doesn't even specialize in mental health, getting put on these drugs. They may or may not help, and then they have to deal with all these side effects. So I don't want to say no one should take them, but I do think that they're extremely overprescribed. Yeah,
I think we're on the verge of a third great cycle in my lifetime. The Valium one, the opiate one, and now the SSRI one. We'll see, though. They've got a multi-billion-dollar industry behind them. P.E. Moskowitz, writer of Mental Health, a newsletter about your broken brain. Moskowitz, Moskowitz.xyz on the internet. PE, thanks a lot for dropping by. It's great talking with you.
Thank you.